everybody, and welcome back to Aimless Ramblings. This is episode 19, and I, Tim, am going to kick off the topic. We're discussing the issue of goodbyes and farewells. So, first of all, I'll throw to Simon, who's going to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of saying goodbye.
Yeah, hi, I'm Simon. So this all started the nuts and bolts kind of angle that I'm going from because I stumbled upon this great article by a Janet McCracken. That's right, her name is Jeanette McCracken, and she was talking about the wonders of, how goodbyes start. So, it's talking about, this one's more focused towards parents by the looks of things, sort of like how to help your kids when it comes to the concept of goodbyes and this movement from home to groups for young children. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but she basically discussed how, in a lot of early interactions with children, we sort of have this concept of peekaboo or whatnot when they don't have object permanence. So it's like we're leaving and we're coming back, and it's teaching kids that, there's a time to say we're leaving this situation, and then there's a time that you will return to this situation. So it sort of reminded me more of, and then it discusses attachment a bit later on. But yeah, in the concept of goodbyes, it's really interesting to see it as not only is it a social thing, but it's also a kind of sort of, it's definitely a social thing. Sorry. Yeah, it is basically a useful tool, not only in saying goodbye to in a short term, but also in a long term. I didn't want to go morbid and start discussing, finality of life, but it was just really interesting seeing it as this concept of goodbye being an important element of existing within society, because you don't think about it, but that's something you have to learn at some point, that you're gonna have to let go of things. And then anyway, Tim.
No, well, thanks, Simon. That was an interesting way to start off the topic. And I've got a question for you, I suppose. So you were talking about object permanence and how children sort of develop it. I was kind of interested in wondering if you or Sam potentially know, because I don't, whether or not is object permanence and learning that things remain there even when you can't see them anymore. Is that something that's a learned thing that everyone goes through, or is that literally because I know this was a big thing in early Skinnerian behaviorist psychology versus Chomsky and the sort of universal grammar linguists, where there's just a period at your life where your brain sort of ticks over and develops that function. So throwing back to you, which one that is.
Yeah, as with everything, I'm going to have to preface it with there's many schools of thought, but the predominant one that comes to mind is that once your brain develops to a particular point, it's able to save memory beyond short term, and as such gets the concept that things can go away and come back, and gets the concept of objects permanence. But yeah, it's mainly supposed to be developmental is mainly the focus that they seem to be putting in modern day and age, but who knows? It could be, little black box and it's a learnt experience, but I'm pretty sure it's just you get to a developmental point where you can retain enough information that you know that something exists outside of your periphery and you're getting the interactions with it. On a much lighter note, it's the same reason why a lot of babies, when they get a bit too excited, have to look away, because they're so engulfed in what's actually assisting. They have to sort of have something to moderate it, so they have to look away so that they have a neutral thing to so their little brains don't explode with excitement when they see something happy. The two things that came to mind for me, because I'm me, so the first one that came to mind was attachment theory, and that sort of links vaguely into goodbyes and whatnot, but I personally just feel attachment theory is interesting enough, and there's the 4 different types of attachment. But it's really interesting seeing that concept of object permanence when it comes to interactions between a mother and a child, and an infant, and just seeing how that attachment affects the hello and goodbye. It's touched on briefly in this thing, but yeah, it's a general interesting thing. If anybody wants to look in it, I can send a thing. But yeah, Tim?
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask. So you've talked about how in the article they're discussing how you can use goodbyes to sort of teach your children. So you're sort of teaching them Like I suppose in this particular context, is it like teaching children that, when you say goodbye and move away from a situation, it's okay because everything will remain the same, and then you come back. But then my question is like, is that necessarily the right way we should be teaching goodbyes to our children or to ourselves? Like, I mean, one of the big things that comes out of the Stoics, who I know are just so in vogue right now as with pop philosophy, is this idea that like Marcus Aurelius talks about it in his meditations, that every night he put his son to bed and he would say to himself in his mind, when you come back in the morning, he may be dead. He might have died during his sleep. And so like he's constantly in the pursuit of ataraxia, like, sort of calmness, always sort of almost catastrophizing every situation, but then coming to accept it. I suppose I'll throw back to you first, Simon, and then if you want to throw to Sam, he's got something to say too.
Well, yeah, this article actually isn't as like grim and what was that. It quite literally is just teaching your children how to say goodbye because, little kids chuck a tantrum every single time they get removed from a situation, and it's teaching them the skill that they can go goodbye and that is not going to ruin the world. So it's like teaching them that sort of concept of getting used to the fact that things won't always be the same. So ironically, it's actually the opposite to what you thought. But yes, Sam, you had anything to say?
Yeah, just to touch on your thing, Tim. I think it's probably part of, we can all be absolutely miserable constantly and make ourselves true stoics, and go lie in a ditch and wait to die. Or you can just, be intelligently aware of the fact that things end, and kind of just ignore the fact because focusing on it doesn't change anything.
All right, I will edit that bit out. Basically, I was just going to say, Sam, something that's interesting is there was a bit of study done talking about the impact that like different traditions that focus on death and make that whole impermanence aspect of your life a really big and important aspect of the profundity of their religion or philosophy. And what they did is actually did a bit of a like study where they're doing once again normative. So you're talking people asking about their opinions and how they rate certain things, but they talk to a bunch of random Westerners, a bunch of people who were like nuns, and then they talk to a bunch of Tibetan Buddhist monks. And as part of that tradition, they spend a stupidly large amount of time just focused on the idea of impermanence, death, and the inevitability of death. And so one of the things I actually found is that, generally speaking, people like in this particular tradition who constantly focused, memento mortis on the idea that they will die, are terrified of death. So because they're constantly looking at it, they actually rated their fear of death much higher than people who weren't constantly looking at it. And so I suppose, if you're talking about profundity, maybe, ignorance is a little bit bliss. But mildly interesting.
Sam was discussing about that whole entire concept of if you focus on it and you're 100% aware of it, whereas if you do that, ignorance, it's really funny because our bodies just naturally do it day in and day out. And as such, I think in an earlier podcast, I mentioned how depression is actually ultra realism. So we actually don't, have to weigh up every single risk we make every single day. We sort of ignore enough of them so we can actually, live and exist. So yeah, that was just really funny that we had a little touchstone back to an earlier discussion we had. But anyway, Tim, you have something to say?
No, I was just going to say that that's rather grim, but also talking about interactions, this is a good time to throw Sam under the bus, as I believe he's going to be talking about saying goodbyes with regards to social networks.
I don't know how that has to do with buses, but yeah. And like you said, some super interesting, nice little cyclical bit of our conversations there. I was going to vaguely talk about almost the social rituals that we have set up with goodbyes to a degree. So say you're at a social event, right? Everyone's having a good time. It's a dinner. And someone's like, right, I've got to have an early one in the morning. I'll probably go. And what does everyone say? Oh, to stay, go and have one more drink or one more cup of tea or, well, you haven't even had dessert yet. We're not concerned terribly in this situation about them dying before we see them. Because, we might see them tomorrow. But it's this little social network we have set up at this dinner party. We've got a web as such. You've got person A who has these traits, person B who has these traits, and we all get the little web figured out, and it all fits together in this little web. And we don't like breaking apart the little webs, because as soon as it breaks, we go, right, okay, the role that was filled by this person is now vacant, and that causes us a little bit of stress. And into a larger aspect, it's the same as when someone's going away for a longer time, even though there's the possibility of them permanently being gone. You have this hole left in your social web. Like, say I disappear, right? I'm going on a holiday. Anna, my wife, is now going to have to cook for herself. So you're like, yes, she's lost the husband that she, in theory, puts up with. But she's also, lost someone who cooks. She'll have to do shopping, that kind of stuff. Probably have to clean up less, though. But so not only is it the we like this person and we want them to be around, it's you have roles within the social network that a departure leaves vacant, which can be, an uncomfortable thing to try and fill. So what do you think, people? Do you think it is like, no one likes goodbyes, right? Do we dislike goodbyes because it's change, because we don't want the person gone, or in part just because they're going to leave us a vacant spot in our social network? Simon?
My general idea on it is, yeah, definitely you're right. It's about that sort of social equilibrium. And once somebody leaves, then it sort of, it sort of changes that equilibrium within the sort of party. And I definitely feel like it's sort of an extension of that social anchor, which a lot of people rely on if they're going into an unfamiliar situation. But I feel like it's less of an anchor for an individual and more of an anchor for the social interaction. So yeah, I think definitely it's that sort of imbalance created by the leaving somebody, because I feel like that's more if there's somebody who's actually involved in the party, less so if somebody's sort of in the periphery and just sort of moping about. You're like, yeah, okay, fair enough.
I think what you've both theorized holds true, and as Simon have said, pointed out, with someone on the periphery. But I think goodbyes and the termination of like a social event to a relationship, to a clique or whatever, also, presents opportunity. So it depends. Like, if you have a social situation that is working for you, I 100% think that people dislike the goodbye because it's essentially like it's a risk, it's a gamble, because they don't know what the next social circumstance that they're now falling into, how that sort of social pecking order and hierarchy and connection and interconnection is going to work, and it might not work in their favor. But it would be interesting, I suppose, to see from the perspective of someone who's in either an unhealthy or an unfulfilling social network or relation, would probably view a change of circumstance or a change of like a sea change, even. Like, you could argue potentially, people desire goodbyes when they feel like they've reached a point of stagnation in their social life, and so that might be the thing that drives people to do something crazy, like, I don't know, give up their job in the big city as a lawyer and move out to the countryside and run a small chook farm. Sam?
Yeah, so one of the articles that I was reading for this, the author actually said, like, what provoked their thinking about it was they had been given, a job of a lifetime opportunity, but in a different city. So they had to leave behind their entire social network in order to, excel or grow as an individual. And so, this personal development is a great thing for them. So they're incredibly looking forwards to it. But at the same time, they had this negative of the goodbyes. And in time, ultimately, all those people that are in their social network will be replaced, or it will adapt to be a longer distance social network. Like, technology is pretty rad like that. But yeah, so you've got the negative and a positive, and I imagine, for some people, breaking the social web as such is, like you were saying, a very good thing. And in that case, it's not probably a goodbye, it's probably a good riddance.
So I suppose I was just going to pose to both of you as a question. With saying goodbye in a social network context here, we're sort of talking about like status quo, where I suppose because of the way that we've conceived of these social networks that we're talking about here, which is your average stat, like every day kind of, you know, you live in and amongst people, and then an opportunity comes up, or you're getting sent away somewhere for a period of time, or an unexpected circumstance means that you have to move away. So that's it can be quite upsetting, and well, it's because part of it I think is about expectation management. If you're not expecting it, it's going to be much more disruptive because you're not going to have time to set up alternative social networks, etc. But one of the things I've experienced has been the kind of friendships that you establish on, call them what you want, canned or Kentucky style holidays, where you're going for a set period of time. Everyone knows the period of time that you're going to be together, and you sort of develop a friendship clique or group. It's quite high schooly actually, with a bunch of people on the bus, and you hang out and you have a lot of fun, and then you say goodbye, and then 99% of the time you never talk to those people ever again. And so I feel like in those circumstances, like maybe any sort of bitterness that could exist in that goodbye is mediated by the fact that it's kind of expected. So, do you think maybe expectation and like when someone has sort of I think it was in Fight Club. He calls them like single serve friendships. Like in that kind of circumstance, the goodbye is actually kind of wrapped up into the package deal of the contract of the friendship, and as such, it's not really a true goodbye in the sense of what you would have with a friend who you might be departing from without warning. Simon, you got something?
Are you sure you're not referring to acquaintances? Because acquaintances definitely fill the bill that you're discussing. But I guess you can have self-serve friendships. I don't know where you draw that line between an acquaintance, a friendship, and a general connection. It's person to person. Anyway, Tim or Sam or whoever wants to respond.
Yeah, that's pretty close to what I was going to say as well, Simon. Is like for me at least, that would not be what I'd call a friendship, but there's still a goodbye to it, even if it is an acquaintance. Like I've had people I've worked with. I mean, I'd never invite them to my house, but there's still a degree of, say, sorrow or such at the parting, because if you like them, you like them. You enjoy their company, and yes, it may be packaged as such, but I'm not sure if, say, you're on this Kentucky tour, right, and it's pre-packaged. Like it's a boxed friendship as such. It's a single serving, yeah. But you don't have a social network to go back to. Does that then still come with that lessened trauma, or do you have the lessened trauma of the departure because you have another network, essentially just a slot straight back into, and this has been a surrogate network? What do you think, Tim?
So I think that's actually really resonates with me, because the thing is you sometimes for because I was saying how chaos isn't a pit, it's a ladder. Like like if you have a new circumstance you're coming into, it's a bit of a roll of the dice. You have people that come on these trips who might be lonely, isolated, not been a great social situation in home, and they're generally the ones that get really emotive at the end of a trip, because it's kind of like it's not just the end of a holiday, but it's the end of a circumstance where they suddenly felt like they had lucked out in the friendship lottery, and had made a whole bunch of new friends who were there and supporting them and having fun with them on holidays, as opposed to when they go back home and they're going into a circumstance which was probably less delightful. So definitely, I think that sort of marries quite well between the two things we're talking about in terms of having a good circumstance versus a bad circumstance, and also how a goodbye can become more bitter if you don't have something better to go back to. I might just move along now to my topic. And what I was going to talk about is, well, originally I was just going to talk about saying goodbye to geographic locations, but I suppose I want to say like saying goodbye to non-person objects in general. And one of the things that brought this up to me, and it's kind of wrapped up a little bit in sort of like the manner in which we say goodbyes, which you've already talked a little bit about, Sam, but a great example is that when young Irish men and women were leaving Ireland to go to North America as part of the big migration movements in the 19th century, they would hold a wake for them. And this would be sort of the last opportunity because, they were never going to come back to Ireland, for them to say goodbye to all their friends and family before they headed over. But in some ways, I sort of saw that as like a ritual for them saying goodbye to their quote unquote homeland of Ireland. And then, as they move off to the new world, to a new life, to a completely different experience where it's in all likelihood they'll never go back and see the place of their birth ever again. And it's just made me think of as well the times that, when I've been posted, I've gone somewhere new. You walk away from the mind map of a city that you've built up over a couple of years, your favorite coffee shop, the place that does a really good toasty, whatever, and you're saying goodbye to that, and that can have its own sort of melancholy bitterness. And I suppose in the same way, if you're finishing a really good video game, or you're at the end of a really moving book series, and I don't know about you, but I really hate rereading books. So for me, when I finish reading a book series, it's kind of like the end of the series for me. I won't read it again. Do you think that we can draw an analogy or even a direct line between the way that we say goodbye and the feelings that we feel for people and for geographic locations and books and things like that? Simon?
Definitely in a more permanent sense, as you were discussing with the Irish and with moving away from places. I feel like the goodbye becomes less bitter if you have a torch that you sort of carry for them. Not in like a, obsessing over the place, but one of the better examples I can think of is a lot of the Irish that moved away and went to America. They brought a lot of their cuisine with them, and that was sort of their little torch of homeland was their cuisine. And that's how they sort of carried on. They said goodbye to the physical manifestation of their place, but they held that little thing. It's the same with, I got into chai lattes because I stopped going to a place that, used to make really good chai lattes. But every single time I drink one of those, besides being a hipster, I'm like sort of brought back to that, that exact moment where I was at that place. And I feel like that sort of carrying a torch in a small sense through food, because I like food. Anyway, Sam, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say it probably, Tim, has to do with a lot of the ability of humans to give non-human emotion, like non-human objects and things, emotive weight. So, like everyone's had their first beta car type thing, like old trusty, whatever. And then when the car finally carks it long after it was due, you feel sad because the car is dead, because we constantly give emotional value to things that aren't humans. And I think that kind of fits into your social web I was talking about earlier. So, like say, I lived on the sunny coast for a while, and when I first moved to Brizzy, I actually really missed the Sunshine Coast because, like you said, I had that mind map, I was entirely comfortable. It was the well-worn Ugg boot as such. There was nothing imposing or unfamiliar about it. I knew everything. You pop me anywhere and I'll know where I am. Because it is, the background for that social network. So I think it's definitely reasonable to mourn the change. But as Simon said, but I guess it's same with people too, like say the people on your Kentucky tour, right? They're not forgotten. You don't interact with them anymore, but they're not forgotten. Any impacts they've had on your life will continue with them. Same as the town. You carry the torch, you take it with you. Because we move forwards. Thoughts?
That was interesting and really good. One of the things I was going to say, I suppose. So we've looked at goodbyes as sort of a bittersweet thing, but we've also talked about how you might carry a torch for whatever you've missed, whether that be an old flame who you now measure every other relationship you ever have with, or a particular style of cuisine which you now consider your little specialty that you cook up in the pan every once in a while. In some ways, do you think, because we always talk about if somebody refuses to move out of their hometown and sort of ends up being in the same job, never getting promoted, never really with any sort of ambition to move out of that. A lot of people look down on that individual as sort of, being a bit soft or, not growing. Like essentially, the idea, if you've stopped growing, you're dead, that kind of perspective. In that sense, maybe when we talk about goodbyes, like the trauma of a goodbye, so the severance and potentially like in the finality of a goodbye as opposed to like a temporary parting, do we then experience some sort of like post-traumatic growth in terms of, does the goodbye force us or prepare us to then absorb new experiences? Or do you think that the new experiences are going to come anyway and the goodbye is just sort of like our hankering for the stability of our previous social relationship? I'll throw to Simon first.
So yeah, you're dipping into the whole concept of resilience theory, which has been seen time and time again. If you've experienced it, then if you've experienced some form of trauma, then the next time you experience that trauma, you're better prepared to be able to move on. But also in relation to your first comment, where it's like, but you pine and hold things for a little bit, like, people that don't seem to move forward. It sort of came to mind, that sort of thing of, you never want to be saved by a knight in shiny, clean armor. You want something to be scuffed, because that means they've gone through a couple of fights. They can actually do something. I feel like it's the same kind of concept. If you never actually go away, you never really realize what you like about the place. And as such, you just never grow and you never have anything. But anyway, Sam, you want to say something?
I'm trying to remember what it's the shitty song. I'm going to sing it and I apologize. No, I have a time, but I'm trying. The impression that I get, right? That song. The entire premise of the song is being challenged, and from the singer's perspective, being grateful having never been challenged. And I think you're right to a degree, Tim, in the being the challenged, actually, unlike the singers, it's a positive in the long run. Like a hermit crab can't grow unless it leaves its shell, whilst we're being all cliched and trashy, but if it leaves its shell, that's when it's, the most vulnerable. So, risks lead to growth and all that jazz. And I mean, the song is a catchy song. That's about all I got to say on that.
Well, fair enough. I definitely I would agree with it in terms of like resilience theory, as Simon was saying. Like, people grow from the experiences that they have. That just makes sense, I suppose, from an evolutionary standpoint as well. But I suppose when it comes to physical locations and saying goodbye to a physical location that you may never see again, maybe you're right. It's not so much the individual location itself, so much as like, the views or the aesthetic appeal of the location. But when we say goodbye to a place, like when it actually really hurts is more so when we've imbued that place with memories. And so maybe it's not so much the location that we're going to be missing. It's the memories and the friends and the things that we've done with our friends in those places. And so it's once again linking back to that social network. It's more of the backdrop, like almost like the the sheet painted with trees that the play of our life has been occurring on, rather than any sort of individual player within the theatre. Well, Simon?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in, like, the first thing that came to mind was, like, those old, like, mom and pop shops that are like restaurants. When they finally close down, everybody's just like, oh, God, the community's going to die. But anyway, I think you wanted to end, so I'll just leave you.
No worries. Well, once again, gentlemen, thank you for an interesting topic and a good chat. And thank you to all our listeners, and I hope you all tune in again next time.
This great warrior has left to his mighty Lord.